these last 2 years specifically have been some of the most challenging 2 years that I can recall experiencing in my life. There's a tool in sobriety where you play the tape forward, right? This has allowed me to play my own kind of life tape forward, so to speak, where I've started to think a lot more about what do I want to ensure comes through when I'm in my latter years. I'm trying to be very, very intentional about how I'm living my life today so that in 10, 20, 30 years from now, if I'm fortunate enough to make it that far, I will have felt as though that I was a proactive author in the story of my life. Hey y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast, where we highlight underrepresented journeys of sobriety from within Black and Brown communities. I'm your host, Ray Donovan. I'm happy to be here with you today. This is going to be a little bit of a different episode than probably those of you who've been listening to the Stacking Days podcast for a while are used to. I've decided to do a solo episode, kind of a little bit of a life update, if you will, for those who are brand new to the conversation that we've been having here on the show. Generally speaking, I'm on here interviewing other folks and giving other folks an opportunity to highlight and share their experiences, their journeys with sobriety, recovery, with our community and with the audience. However, every once in a while, I think it's appropriate for me to come in and give you all updates on where I am in my own journey. If you go back to episode 1 titled My Why, you will see that and hear that Stacking Days has really been part of my toolkit in terms of how I keep myself on my relatively straight and narrow path of sobriety. It's both an accountability tool, it's a community tool, it's a therapeutic tool for me to have these conversations. So I do think that it's appropriate every once in a while for me to check back in with the broader community and just kind of share where I'm at. So I don't know how long this episode will go. Probably won't keep you for too long, but I do think it's worth starting this conversation out and just noting one. I just recently in September celebrated my 3-year anniversary, soberversary, which I'm extremely proud about. I think that unlike a lot of folks, I don't make a whole lot of fanfare out of milestone moments in my sobriety, and that's only more so because that's just my personality type. I celebrate extremely loudly internally. I celebrate extremely loudly with the folks that are close to me, that have been on this journey with me, frankly, over the last 3 years. But I've gotten to a point, now in my sobriety where I've really just tried to indoctrinate my path as my lifestyle. So yes, I'm still very much aware of the fact that this is a one day at a time journey. I'm very aware and cognizant of what a year is, what 2 years is, what 3 years is. But at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm taking it in stride. So, for anyone who's experienced this journey, we all recognize that you're going to have your fair share of high moments and you're going to have your fair share of low moments. So something that's I've really tried to hold on to that I think has been able to sustain me is I don't get too low in those low moments, or I at least try my best not to. And, in turn, I also try to be realistic and pragmatic about my moments of triumph. And so really just trying to take everything in stride, but at the same time, super proud of the fact that I'm sitting here, 3 years and change into this sobriety journey. And, I've had an opportunity, in the last year and a half to really develop what that looks like. So I thought it would be helpful to kind of just give you all a little bit of a snapshot into what those 3 years have looked like, and give you an update on some things that, I haven't, shared very recently. So let me just start that off by saying these last 2 years specifically have been some of the most challenging 2 years that I can recall experiencing in my life. There has been quite a bit of pressure on just me as an individual, emotionally, spiritually, certainly as of late, physically. We'll kind of get into a lot of those things. And I think that part of the reason why it has been such a challenging period of time is, one, I've just had to just experience some trying moments, but two, I think it's also been extremely challenging because I haven't had my default of alcohol to lean back on in order to soothe myself in moments of trial, which has been my decision, right? And I'm extremely proud of that decision, and I think that because of that, it's allowed me to really feel life. And I think that, having spent, 3 decades, not necessarily experiencing the full extent of life, my emotional connection to it, my physical connection to it, this last 2 years has certainly, with the clarity that I've gotten from, by way of my sobriety, has been eye-opening. And but I wouldn't trade it in for the world. So, a few things that I think that I want to just highlight that I've experienced, and some I've mentioned in passing other solo episodes, and maybe here and there on social, is just big life moments, right? 2 years ago, I experienced the passing of someone in my family who, even though our relationship had become estranged and we weren't that close leading up until the time of his passing, we grew up damn near, brothers. Almost did everything together at certain points in our lives. And he was a few years older than me. And one of the things that really drove home, and this was earlier on in my sobriety, is I was just completely stripped naked in terms of my emotions, and having to really grieve the loss of someone who held a pretty important role in my life, in a very raw way. And the finiteness of life, I think at that point, started to take on a whole new meaning. And I think part of it was because he and I were so close in age, and he had has children himself, and was married, and so there were a lot of life similarities. So I think that in some ways it caused me to look in the mirror at my own experience, and which caused me to really start thinking about the concept of death, and the concept of life, and the concept of our mortality very much more acutely. And it sometimes, grieving in that way was really challenging for me. And in other times it was really eye-opening for me. And even up until today, for various reasons, it continues to drive me. I mean, I keep mementos and memories of him in my spaces, and I think that because of that, it's caused me to be very realistic about my own contributions and where I want to spend my time and where I don't want to spend my time and energy. So, there's certainly a silver lining that has come on the back of that experience, but it's been really challenging. And we talk a lot on this show about, brothers being vulnerable. And for me, this has brought up some of the more real emotions inside of me, and I found myself tearing up, crying, probably more because of this circumstance over the last couple of years than a lot. It's really pulled a lot out of me that is laid dormant for quite some time, and but I'm hopefully all the better man for it as I continue on my journey. So death and grieving, I think that is certainly something that I've struggled with and had challenges with over the last couple of years. So but it's been a cornerstone to keeping me on my path, not just my path of sobriety, but also my path in trying to identify my own purpose and trying to identify, what legacy I'm going to leave behind for my children and for those that I care about. I wanted to start off by saying that, and it's kind of bookended on the other side by being very much intertwined with the aging of family and loved ones. I have spent a pretty significant amount of time for me in my hometown, and for those who are just being introduced to the podcast for the first time, I'm originally from Montreal, Canada. So I've been spending some time back in Montreal over the last year, and that has in large part been driven by the ailing physical health and the aging of my grandparents. So my parents divorced when I was 4 years old. And for a good chunk of time, my grandmother and my grandfather were certainly parental figures in my life. I mean, I was fortunate to still have my mother a part of my life and my father a part of my life. But on the day-to-day, my grandparents really stepped up and filled a paternal, maternal role in my life. And now, they're in their early to mid 90s. And they're kind of in the in the twilight, the back half here. And my grandmother had spent a significant amount of time in the hospital. My grandfather, sitting there watching the love of his life in the hospital, and me kind of experiencing that and witnessing all of that as a grown man and trying to contribute and support and help and protect as best as I can, but also realizing that they are on the course that we are all on, and they're on, they're almost near the last stop, and it's a challenging, it's a challenging thing to reconcile, but at the same time, similar to what I was saying earlier about, my other family member passing, it really shines a light on how I've been viewing my own existence. And also, there's a tool in sobriety where you play the tape forward, right? And this has allowed me to play my own kind of life tape forward, so to speak, where I've started to think a lot more about what do I want to ensure comes through when I'm in my latter years, when I'm in my latter days. And if there's one thing that I've recognized, now in my 40s, is that what you do in your 20s, your 30s, even in your teens, it still is going to affect what you're doing in your 40s, your 50s. So I'm trying to be very, very intentional about how I'm living my life today, so that in 10, 20, 30 years from now, if I'm fortunate enough to make it that far, I will have felt as though that I was a proactive author in the story of my life. And so I've had all of these kind of external examples of folks who are very, very close to me, who have caused me not only to look at them in probably the most honest and real light that I ever have, but it's also reinforced that perspective that I have on my own existence. So I just kind of wanted to bookend the conversation with that. I think that there's something about the human existence, and then when you intertwine it into this pursuit of sobriety, this pursuit of personal development, this pursuit of healing, I just think that there are some magical things that can happen for an individual. They certainly have for me, but they have not come without the fair share of challenge, and without a fair share of just kind of like an emotional breaking down. And I think that a lot of folks, when they step into sobriety, they think that everything is going to be roses, and they believe that everything is going to be fantastic every day. It clearly is not. In some ways, it almost even highlights the realities of life. But you are able to take those realities head on. There's nowhere to hide, and I think that, in my opinion, that's the way that you want to live if you're going to become a fully developed 360-degree contributing member of our society. So I'm in like my toddler years, right, of sobriety at 3 years. And on this podcast, you guys can go back into the episodes. Maybe we'll leave a few in the show notes here. I've had the fortune, especially going into the third season, of talking to folks who are in longer term sobriety. So we're talking, a decade, even more. And what I've recognized in talking with a lot of these folks is that you're always going to be presented with these life challenges, and it doesn't necessarily ever get any easier. But what does happen is you start to gain a certain degree of wisdom about yourself. And if you're able to stick into it long enough and stack some days, you're in a better position to start crafting a life of intention, a life of meaning, and you're certainly going to be in the driver's seat as opposed to being in the third row in the back, which is what a lot of folks, and including myself, have felt like in the past when we've leaned on alcohol as a mechanism to kind of cope with some of the challenges in life and even celebrate the better moments in life. But oh man. Again, I oftentimes will say I enjoy the Stacking Days podcast because it enables me to highlight others and other folks and their journeys. And it's always challenging for me to come back in and start highlighting my own experience in sobriety and my own experience in life. But I've tried to view at least this specific episode as almost a confessional, right? Where I can come in, I can be honest and open with you all, but I will be honest also in saying it's taken me some time to step into the booth to have this conversation, just because it is just, I think for anyone, it's just challenging to come to terms with where they're at. And for me personally, I'm a pretty private person. So to put things out there constantly, consistently on a pretty public platform and potentially have it live into perpetuity is a daunting realization. But again, I use this as a tool, an accountability tool for myself. So I'm happy to contribute into the conversation. A few other points that have been, pretty challenging over the last several years that I think that have caused certainly, a huge degree of strain and tension on my own existence, my own experiences is one, transitioning into this world of initially unemployment, underemployment. I've done some consulting work, some contracting work over the last year and a half. And, for someone who for the longest time has always been gainfully employed and has been able to craft a pretty successful career for myself in the space that I work within, this last year has been really challenging because there's been a lot of unknowns. There's been unknowns financially. There's been unknowns in terms of where I'm spending my time and my bandwidth and where I'm, able to contribute both externally into professional partners and stakeholders, but more importantly, how I'm contributing back internally into my own household. So, as a man and as a Black man, it has been a badge of honor for me to be a breadwinner, to be a financial contributor, to protect my family, to create a life for them that I felt as though that I maybe didn't always have. As a father, being able to be there for my children, as a husband, being able to be there for my wife. And I think that because of my professional circumstances over the last year and a half, that certainly has been challenging. So, I've kind of run the gamut over the last few years, last year and a half, as I mentioned, doing consulting work for, and just to reverse, for those who don't know, my day job is working in consumer packaged goods, specifically in food, specifically in sales, business development, and strategy. And so I've spent the last year and a half working with brands, but those engagements haven't all been crystal stairs, and they've been quite challenging. And as of late, I've gotten to a point where I've wanted to just move back into more of a full-time engagement. So over the last couple of weeks, at the time of this recording, in early October, I just started a new full-time role. So taking on the responsibilities that come with being engaged with a brand on a full-time basis versus on a contract basis, a consulting basis, has certainly been a strain on just my time, my bandwidth, my energy, but a welcome strain because, as I mentioned, there's just been so much over the last year and a half that has caused pressure. And my hope is that moving in this direction will position me to relieve some of that pressure and mainly, for anyone who's out there who's been in a meaningful relationship, sobriety and recovery poses a lot of stress on a relationship, and in itself. Not to mention, in my experience, the stresses that have come with, some financial challenges, right? And not feeling like I'm in a position to consistently alleviate that stress has been extremely challenging. So I've gotten to that point where I said, you know what, hey, look, I need to come back into this world on a more full-time basis. And I'm excited about that new chapter in my personal, professional life, and ultimately how that will enable me to simplify some of the other aspects of my contributions into my own world, and as I mentioned, the roles that I play: father, husband, friend, so on and so forth. So that's been a journey in trying in navigating those waters of trying to identify, where do I want to be, how do I want to show up, and where do I want to show up professionally has certainly been a challenge, and all the while, I've continued to pour back into the Stacking Days podcast. I've never looked at this as being, a professional endeavor, a financial endeavor. I think a lot of folks who get into podcasting, they do look at it that way. But for me, this has been therapeutic in this along the journey of all of these other things being complete disarray in my life. This has been therapeutic in that it's been a pillar that I've been able to kind of rally around, while there has been so many other moving parts in my life. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you are, we'd really love it if you could leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcast or a rating on Spotify. And of course, please feel free to invite somebody into the conversation. If you feel like you have a story to share on the podcast, why not apply to be a guest? You can do so by completing the form on the podcast description or find it on stackingdays.com. That's stackndayys.com. But for now, let's jump back into the conversation. And I guess that's a great segue into the next kind of real shakeup. And we talk a lot in this podcast about tools, toolkits, resources, strategies that I've used to keep myself on the straight and narrow world of sobriety. And one of those tools has been therapy. From the early years of my sobriety, I've enlisted a therapist, and after quite a bit of searching, quite a bit of trial and error with various practitioners, I ultimately found a Black woman who has been fantastic, and I've worked with her for 2 years, really the first 2 years of my journey, and it's allowed me to uncover quite a bit. And if nothing else, it's allowed me to create a space that is, relatively neutral, that I can come into and address subject matter, feelings, and learn about things in myself that, frankly, I don't really have very many spaces like that in my life. So I say all that to say that my therapist of almost 2 years recently went on maternity leave. She's and if she does listen to this on her leave, I want her to know that I am forever grateful for the time that we've been able to spend together. But At the same time, she's on maternity leave. So this cornerstone resource and tool that I've really doubled down on over the last couple of years in order to fortify myself is for the time being at least no longer. So I've had to lean on a lot of the work that I have done over the last couple of years, but also continue to push forward without, number one, this space, this ear, and this voice that have really helped me in maintaining my path. So I've had to, lean on the podcast probably even more than I've had to in the past. I've had to lean on community, some of which, folks that I've met, through interviewing them on this podcast, and just in this the sober community, particularly folks of color, more broadly speaking. I've had to lean on that community more, and I've also had to just be more intentional about my own self-reflection, my own self-critique, and not allowing myself to default back into these innate ways and behaviors, emotionally and intellectually, that I have in the past. So, just really trying to focus on being present in terms of how I'm interacting emotionally and intellectually, something that came out of therapy. But certainly now that I don't have my coach, my emotional coach by my side, that's been a pretty significant development. And I think that, I've certainly had moments over the last year, at least prior to my therapist going on maternity leave, where I was questioning what role therapy actually was going to continue to play in my journey. And I think that, it's, people always say, like, you don't know what you have until it's gone. I think that in my therapist moving into her leave, and that break in my therapeutic sessions and practice coming to fruition, it has caused me to even look at therapy and in a way that maybe I wasn't able to look at it when I was, knee deep into it. And certainly, again, will echo and be an advocate for that space. And certainly, I've been thinking about this a lot. Once my therapist comes back from maternity, I will be picking my sessions back up, because I do think that they are valuable. And I think, like any other relationship, as you continue to invest in said relationships, they become more meaningful. So while I'm very appreciative and have certainly learned quite a bit from this ongoing hiatus, it's also at the same time elevated my understanding and my desire for therapy to continue to be a part of my own just broader development, and certainly, in terms of me continuing to develop my individuality as a sober Black man. So that's been something else that I've been thinking quite a bit about lately. I've had a fair share rather of challenges, fair share of triumphs over the last several years, but something that comes to mind is, has there been anything that has reshaped my understanding of sobriety over the last 3 years? And I think that for those who are in early sobriety, for those who have stacked some days, maybe some years under their belt, I can't speak to your specific circumstance, so I'll continue to have folks on who can speak to their own circumstance. But for me, the thing that continues to reshape my understanding of sobriety is time. I think that that time is a consummate teacher, and certainly when it comes to sobriety and recovery and removing something that is cancerous from your life, the further you are from that moment where you've made that decision for yourself, the more you continue to learn, not just about yourself, but the world around you. And I think that that's a valuable gift that one can give themselves, is the gift of time, right? Like time and the gift of time and and acquiring more time in one's life is almost a measurement of wealth. And so for me, time is something certainly that I've come to recognize continues to not just reshape my understanding of sobriety and that journey, but just continues to reshape my understanding of myself and the development of myself in this journey. So, and if this is kind of way too kind of top heavy, I apologize. But this has come on the back of quite a bit of self-reflection over the last couple of years of my journey, and so I want to say, if you can give yourself that gift of time, that gift of reflection, it's going to continue to reshape your own understanding. But certainly, in my opinion, that's a valuable gift that one can give to themselves. And you can go back, across any conversation that we've had on this platform and others, and you'll recognize that very few folks will speak poorly of the time that they've had in their sobriety. Certainly, there are going to be challenges, but net, I think that folks are ending up on top once they've adopted that being a part of their existence. So, I think I talked a lot about the pieces that have been challenging for me in the last year and a half. But on a light note, there's also been some great pieces that have truly filled me up. So I mentioned earlier, for example, that the last couple of years have been extremely challenging on my relationship with my wife, and she's been fortunate enough to come into this journey. I've had her on an episode before. I've talked to our relationship, to relationship in general, on the show with others, and in solo episodes. And I'll say that we've gotten to points over the last year and a half that have been extremely trying, both on us individually and on our sanctity of marriage. And I'll say that I'm sitting here today, I'm in we got to a place where, at least for me, I started tossing this concept around, like, how do we get back to X? How do we get back to a place of levity? And I started to recognize that it was less so about me trying to get back to a place of levity, a place of joy, a place of love, but it was more so about how do I move towards creating a new plateau of levity, a new plateau of joy, a new plateau of happiness and love with this individual. And I think that journey has been challenging. It's been challenging for me as an individual, just because I've been stripping myself emotionally over the last couple of years in sobriety. It's been challenging for my partner. Certainly, because for anyone who's out there who's had to support someone like myself who's been on this journey, that obviously creates a huge degree of emotional tension. And then we all have our own stuff to deal with as well. So my wife is a relatively new mother of two. We've been married for 8 years. She's an entrepreneur, just growing a fantastic business. And so she's had a whole bunch of success that hasn't come without her own degree of challenge. So when you kind of bring those two pieces together, that can just create a lot of challenge, a lot of strife. But I'm proud to say, I feel like we've gotten to a point where we continue to learn who we are as individuals. We continue to learn who we are as a couple. And also, most importantly, I think that we continue to make the choice to come back to each other. And there have been moments, certainly over the last year and a half, where I wasn't so confident in being able to say something like that. So I apologize, sweetheart, if I'm putting our stuff out there, but I'm putting it out there to highlight the fact that the challenge that has come over the last couple of years has only reinforced and validated a love that I have for you as a person, as a woman, as the mother of my children, as my best friend. And I don't know if I would have been able to get to that place had it not been for that very challenging day in September of 2021. So all to say, certainly a challenge, but I think there's a lot of light at the end of at least that tunnel. And I share that with the broader audience to say that what sobriety, in at least in this respect, has done is that it's highlighted, a lot of blind spots for me in my life, and it's giving me an opportunity to address them. By no means am I perfect on a day-to-day basis, but I'm aware, right? And I'm cognizant of how I'm showing up, at least in this specific realm of my life. And what it's allowed me to do is reaffirmed a commitment that I'm doubling down on, because I do believe that this is a really healthy aspect of life that I want to be involved in partnership and the building of family. So I wanted to highlight that for y'all who are out there, because you're going to move into sobriety. You may already be in it, and there's just going to be challenges like at every turn. And in every single one of those challenges, you'll have an opportunity to decide which way you're going to move, which road you're going to take, and ultimately, what commitment are you going to make? Do you want to make? Do you have the capacity to make? And the one thing that I've recognized, there's many things that I recognize, as you can already tell, but one other thing that I've recognized in this journey is that we all have the capability to do hard things if we're willing to lean into it. And, and so this has been one aspect of life for me that I've certainly have wanted to lean into. And I love my wife even more today than I probably ever have, even though we've been through some of the more challenging times over the last couple of years than we probably ever have as a couple and as individuals. So I'll leave that there. On a lighter note, as I start to close this whole thing out, is you got to find some levity in your life. You know what I mean? Like, there's an opportunity out there constantly for doom and gloom. There's an opportunity out there constantly to beat yourself up. There's an opportunity out there constantly to negative self-talk oneself into a state of freeze, into a state of flight. And you're probably wondering where I'm going with this, but I think ultimately what I'm trying to say is, like, you got to find some moments where you are not taking yourself too seriously, where you got to find some moments where you can smile a little bit, laugh a little bit. You got to find some moments where you kind of throw some things into the mix that are unconventional for you. And one of those things for me, and please, feel free to fast forward to for the next 30 seconds if you want to. But one of the things that I found have being really great to bring levity into one's life, and also, give yourself an opportunity to move your body, is I found pickleball. All right. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with what pickleball is basically a mashup of tennis and ping pong, and you play it with this wiffle ball on a very, very small, small outdoor or indoor court. And this sport has been around now for a handful of years, and it's pretty prevalent in the senior community. But they tout the sport as being one of the fastest growing sports in America, and it probably is. But the reason why I've enjoyed it is, one, yes, it allows you to get the physical activity, but also it just allows for very innocent human connectivity, right? So I've been playing this sport with a gamut of individuals, races, religions, political persuasions, and also age demographics. So it's not uncommon for you to be out there playing pickleball with someone who is literally in their mid 60s or their mid 70s, and then you're playing with someone who's in their mid 20s. So that's just been really fun. And I've been doing this, once, twice, 3 times a week for the last couple months since about July. And I think that that's helped to take the edge off of some of the other, more challenging, things that I've been kind of working through in my toddler years of sobriety. So I say all that to say, find something fun to do. And it may be something that is completely outside of your character. It may be something that is completely outside of your comfort zone. But I will say that if you find something that, that sparks this like childlike curiosity and innocence, then lean into it, because at the end of the day, it's nurturing a part of you that you maybe have been neglecting for some time. So it may not necessarily be pickleball for you. It could be something else. It could be journaling. It could be poetry. It could be recording some music if you believe yourself to be a singer or not. It could be anything, but find something that you can lean into that appeals to your more innocent self. I think is what I'm getting at. So that's been huge for me. So I'm gonna close this episode out and leave some subject matter to a future solo episode. But I just wanted to say, for the folks out there who've been listening to this show, again, I will continue to echo. Would love your feedback, whether that's through a review on any of the platforms that you listen to. You can reach out to me directly via social or via email. All that will be in the show notes or at the end of this episode. I want to be able to develop this conversation out. I mean, yes, this is about sobriety, this is about recovery, but fundamentally, this whole platform is about consistency in developing, one's self. With that being said, really appreciate y'all. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share a little bit more about my story with you guys this week. We will be back next week with another interview of the Stacking Days podcast. But in the meantime, please take it one day at a time, and also be well one day at a time. Don't feel as though that you need to bite off any more than you can chew. And I've found in my 3 years that small bites go a long way. So take one bite at a time. Until next week, thank you guys, and we'll chat with you soon. Peace. I appreciate you guys listening to the Stacking Days podcast. I hope this episode added value to your recovery and wellness journey. Before we go our separate ways, let's connect on social. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Stacking Days, or via the website www.stackingdays.com. By supporting the show, you can play a direct role in amplifying people of color in their pursuit of recovery. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe or hit the follow button. This way, you'll never miss an episode, all while playing an active part in creating the ecosystem where diverse voices and healing matter. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. For more information on the resources and support available, take a look at SAMHSA and some other resources shared in the description. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.